Good morning, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. And it is my distinct pleasure to be with you one more time to discuss a very important topical matter. Now, today or this morning, we shall be looking at the concept of meritocracy, right? There is much in the media about meritocracy in light of what happened to Claudine Gay and some other minorities in different spheres of our society, particularly in the United States. But meritocracy also applies to any society in the world. But the United States likes to brag itself as one of the most meritocratic societies, right? A society that is built on meritocracy because of the ethos of its constitution, which says that we are all created equally, right, in God. Now, the fact of the matter is that let us begin by looking at the etymology of the word and what it means. And I went here on Wikipedia, and it says meritocracy, and it comes from the root word merit, from the Latin word mereo, right, and crasse, from ancient Greek, and we have kratos, which means strength or power, and is the notion of a political system in which economic goods or political power are vested in individual people based on ability and talent rather than wealth or social class. So meritocracy, in other words, is based on your talent and your skill, right? And it doesn't have anything to do with your political or social class, that is your wealth that you have or the social class from which you came, right? So, but is that true that the positions that many of us occupy, come from our talents and skills and not from the class from which we emerged, right? Whether from the upper echelons or the middle class or the lower echelons of society. Now, that is a question that we have to pose because, we live in a delusional age, I must say that, where people talk because much of what we see comes from an ideological framework, right? And people think that theory sometimes aligns with what is the reality. And oftentimes, theory does not really align with the everyday reality, right? Or everyday realities of life. And we've got to come to terms with these realities, with these facts, right? Now, let us look briefly at this video that was, I need to take this thing out, yeah, that, what's his name, Professor, um, yeah, I'm not seeing his name here, but it's a Harvard philosopher. And the YouTube video here says that Harvard philosopher, oh, his name is Michael Sandel, right? So he's Michael Sandel, and he's a Harvard philosopher, right? I'm not sure if he is a professor there at this point in time or he's a graduate of Harvard. I'm not sure. But let's listen to a conversation that he is having with a British journalist. So let me pull that up so that you can listen to it and then we can continue our conversation. All right, so let me see if I could start it here from the beginning. Yes, so I am going to do that right now. Okay, good. So let's begin.
So your book, of course, is The Tyranny of Merit. And it almost sounds a little bit counterintuitive. If you're me sitting in, class-ridden Britain, you look at the United States and you think, wow, it's not about class there, it's about merit. And if you try hard, you can succeed. But you're saying that now is a false narrative, that class is one thing, but also meritocracy is not what it used to be. Tell me how you analyze the reality in that regard.
Right. There are two problems, Christiane. One of them is that we don't live up to the meritocratic principles we profess. At Ivy League universities in the US, for example, despite generous financial assistance for students from poor families, still, there are more students in these places from the top 1% than from the entire bottom half of the country combined. So the opportunity to rise, individual mobility, which is one of the great promises of the American dream that has attracted people around the world, doesn't quite fit the facts on the ground. It's harder to rise in the US and in Britain than in many other places, many European countries, than in Canada. That's one problem. But there's a deeper problem, which is the meritocratic ideal that if you work hard, you can rise, you can overcome the inequality we've experienced in recent decades through individual mobility. That ideal is flawed, at least so I try to argue in the book. It's corrosive of the common good because it leads the successful, those who land on top, to believe that their success is their own doing and that they therefore deserve the bounty the market bestows on them, and by implication, that those on the bottom must deserve their fate as well. And this set of attitudes, these attitudes towards success that have accompanied growing inequality of recent decades, this, I think, accounts for the deep resentments and anger and sense of grievance by many working people who have fueled the populist authoritarian backlash against mainstream parties and governing elites.
Okay, so we have heard from this Michael Sandel guy, who is a Harvard philosopher, and he suggested that, well, he asserted that it is harder to improve on one's life based on meritocracy in England and also in the United States than it is in Canada and other countries. Well, that might be debatable, right? I'm not saying that that is a fact. He has not presented any data, so I'm not sure if that is a hard fact or it's just an opinion that he's stating. But what is very sure is for anybody who has observed the US society is that a lot of what is there, we know that it's not based on meritocracy, right? And we know that it continues to uphold a racial hierarchical system. And that, many times white people get positions, and I'm using the word white now. I have said on many occasions on this channel that there is no white person or there is no black person, and I mean it. I mean what I say. But the fact of the matter is I'm using that in the context in light of what we use and what we mean in our society. So people of European descent, right? They tend to get positions of, a higher of prestigious positions than what you would have other minorities getting. And a lot of times it's not because they are brighter, they're smarter, they're more intelligent than other minority, people. It's just that they get it because of the color of their skin. Whether we like it or not, the US society is built on skin color. From the very first day of society, we know that that was the case. Now, we must understand that we have been talking about the whole matter of Claudine Gay and other minorities in America, and do they really merit their positions, right? Are they qualified enough to be in the positions that they are in? Or is the color of their skin the determining factor that contributed to their being in their positions that they find themselves in? Now, why is it always that the media, particularly the left-wing media, always have to bring up the color of one's skin or one's race when they're talking about a particular position? If they're talking about, predominantly white people, they tend to talk about character, right? The content of their character, and not necessarily questioning their qualification or questioning the caliber of their the caliber of their education. But when it comes on to minorities, we find that the media right? Like to question even the left-wing media that who behaves or which behaves as if it is pro-minorities, right? They tend to create this image in people's minds as if minorities are inferior, right? To their white counterparts, right? That's what they always do. When it comes on to any sort of blunders made by minorities, it has to go back to are minorities competent as their white counterparts. And I always find that to be infantile because yes, they are, and some are even far more competent than their so-called white counterparts, right? But we need to assess this much more in depth and to understand that a lot of times, even among or in our elite university institutions in the United States, that is, we find that many of the students who go there are not necessarily going there for their academic brilliance, right? Based on their academic brilliance, based on their academic merit, right? Based on the system of meritocracy. They're going there based on their familial contacts, based on their wealth, right? And a lot of other factors which have, fitted them, which not fitted them, but which have allowed them to be admitted into such institutions. We're going to look at this article from the New York, well, let's look at New York Times first, because for those of you who are on the left, right, I know that you like your New York Times, right, because that's the Bible, the gospel of what is fact and what is not fact for you. Isn't that so, right? I remember Dr. Pierre Corey, who is the president of the FLCCC, that's the Frontline Doctors Association. I can't remember the entire acronym, all right, but Dr. Pierre Corey, he spoke about, before and perhaps during the first stage of the pandemic, he was always an avid reader of the New York Times. He would read it page to page, from cover to cover, right, every morning, right, because he thought that everything that the New York Times presented, was factual, was based on facts, and that was the reality. Of course, he now has a different opinion, but the fact of the matter is that I understand that people consider this paper to be very respectable and to be the most authoritative source of information in the US and in some other parts of the world. Now, this article was actually produced or published, I should say, on February 7th, 2012. So it was produced a number of years ago, 11 years ago, 12, approaching 12 years ago. So that was a long time, but still relevant, what they're suggesting here. Chinese students paying US tuitions, how and why? That's the title of the article. So Rendezvous recently poked around the issue of Chinese high school students doctoring their applications to gain admission to US universities. Surveys and anecdotal evidence suggest that more than half of all Chinese students will have baked something in their admission packets. What we were unable to explore in our original piece, however, was how these students and their families financed their American college educations. US students amass debt, of course, but educational loans in China are virtually unheard of. I'm always surprised by how indifferent Chinese parents are to costs, said Jiang Shiqing, the deputy principal of Peking University High School, one of China's premier schools. He helps students and their families with their study abroad plans, and he wrote to us at length about the contours of this highly nuanced issue. Most of our parents are indeed well-connected and wealthy, Mr. Jian said, although it's extremely unclear how much money they actually have. A government official in Beijing may officially make 5,000 yuan a month, about $790, but there's no way that he's only making that much money. Tuition, as Mr. Zhang's high school, is nearly $12,700 a year, he said. Many upwardly mobile Chinese families, especially those who have adhered to the state's one-child policy, have been saving for years to pay for college, have been saving, not saving, but saving for years to pay for college. If they're still short, they might sell their apartment and extended family members might kick in. Of Mr. Jiang's 43 current students, only one has explicitly told him that she cannot afford overseas study. So she's looking for a scholarship. Foreign students are highly prized and heavily recruited by budget-challenged public universities in the United States because the foreigners typically pay much higher tuition fees than in-state students. So this is business, right? So we are seeing here that the Chinese students who find the American education system to be, in some cases, more creative, and in other cases, to be much more saleable, right? Because if they have a US degree, their chances of getting a job continues to rise, right? At the highly ranked University of Michigan, for example, an incoming freshman from Shanghai is charged nearly $38,000 in annual tuition fees, while a kid from Kalamazoo will pay less than $13,000. And in books, travel, room, board, and the occasional 2 a.m. pizza, and the Chinese student will well be over $50,000. That's a lot of money, right? Mr. Zhang noted the tension that often arises when it becomes clear that the Chinese or other foreign students are paying far more than their in-state counterparts. So education in the United States is a business, right? And it has been a business for a long time, right? And when you see that these foreign students are coming in and they have to pay sometimes double or triple what a native has to pay, an in-state person has to pay, it boggles the mind, right? And you wonder if the citizens would eventually be priced out of the market. But let's continue to read on. The locals think that the Chinese are rich foreigners, while the Chinese think that they are paying for the lazy locals to go to school, right? Mr. Jiang said. This disparity also leads to a mentality rather about among Chinese students that they are purchasing the American university degree. What is very stark here is how interconnected our world is, right? And one would have thought that a Chinese student being hundreds of thousands of miles away from US shores would not be connected to the US economy. But it's so interconnected, it's so intertwined that sometimes when you hear our politicians saying that China is an enemy, the Chinese are the enemies, you really wonder, what are they saying, right? When a lot of times both countries cannot live at this point because we're living in globalization, right? At this juncture of history, I don't think any country can live without the other, right? So that's for us to understand. Now, so why do Chinese parents spend so much money? The question is being asked. While there is a minority of parents who think an American education is superior, I think most see an American college degree as a luxury goods item, and they want the face value of an American educated child. This study abroad phenomenon is also benefiting from a herd mentality. At Mr. Zhang's school, the parents took most closely to the rankings by US News and World Report, because I do understand, based on another article I read, that the Chinese students, if they attend, for example, a community college in the United States or a college that is not ranked high, chances are when they return to China, they won't get a good job, right? So if their goal is to get a good job upon returning to China, they will have to ensure that they attend a college that is ranked in the top 50 or among the top 40. Yeah, very, very important that you understand that. So it's not that they can go to any school in America. They have to go to a school that is highly ranked, not in the top 100, but in the top 40 or the top 50, right? If not, chances are, and there have been anecdotal evidence where in which the companies, for example, Tencent, that's the parent company of WeChat, among other companies in China, would not accept a student coming from a lower ranked college, be it a community college or a college, a university that is not among the top 50th ranked in terms of its quality of education. They're usually aiming for a top 50 school, as he's suggesting here. He said, the really prestigious brands in China are Harvard, Every Parent's Dream School, Yale, Princeton, MIT, Stanford, and Wharton. So all of these schools are the schools that the Chinese parents and their children are aiming for. Mr. Jiang also mentioned a new trend he's seeing, a growing consensus within China that Chinese students who studied abroad and who return to China are becoming a social problem. They return with limited English and limited marketable skills, yet they also have high expectations, he said, right? Now, let's look at what the Forbes is saying here about the Chinese students, going to school in North America and the bribery that takes place in these universities, right, in America. Uncertainly, the article is written by Zheyan Ni, right, and is a member of the Forbes staff, and it was written on July 30th, 2014, so some years ago too. On certain weekends in May, June, and October, hotels in Hong Kong are hard to book. They are fully packed with mainland Chinese students who arrive with piles of exam preparation and barren 3,500 vocabulary sheets. It's early to bed to get enough sleep to set off right the next morning for the 5-hour SAT test. That's the SAT's test. There is no official SAT site in mainland open to the general public, whether from Shanghai, 700 miles away, or Zhejiang, 2,100 miles away. Chinese students must fly to the closest test location, Hong Kong, and more are making the trip. Since 2012, the annual number of mainland Chinese SAT test takers has exceeded 40,000. Due to the increasing influx of SAT takers into Hong Kong, the city has set up a special oversized test site to fit 10,000 students at a time. Cost for one student's 3-day SAT travel is around $1,000, not including some must-have luxury goods they piggyback on their way home. Now, it's very interesting here, how much money these people invest in their education. Starting in 2012, Kairos Education, one of the most successful agencies headquartered in Shanghai, began to charge students $15,000 to $32,000. AIC Education, another major study abroad agency, charges $20,000 to $40,000 in 2014. So can you imagine what they're charging now? But this is some time ago. These companies recruit marketable Ivy League graduates and former admission officers from the US as consultants. Chen Zhang, CEO of AIC, says, we bring America's best college graduates to China. They provide individualized and high-quality essay trainings and application service for students before they go to the US. A good offer is not enough. We emphasize the learning process, right? So you have graduates from these prestigious elite American institutions who are going to prepare the Chinese students for admission into top American universities. The new industry ranges from SAT tutoring all the way up to premium services. For example, there are visa application specialists who fill out F1 forms for students. General consultants will book flight tickets and arrange college tours. Some manage the process so closely that students receive admission letters without touching an application. Wow, they receive admission letters without touching an application because all of the work is being done for them, right? Of course, they have to pay for the services. And you talk about meritocracy in the United States. How many Black or minority students in the United States have this sort of privilege, right, in which they can pay their way into the university? Because this is really paying your way into the university, right? It's clear here. This is actually paying your way, pay for play right, into the university. This is not through meritocracy, because if you're talking about meritocracy, you're talking about people writing their own applications, right? I'm not saying that they cannot be edited by other people who might be more competent and stuff like that, but they don't even touch their application as the article is here suggesting. After all, spending $60,000 on college applications alone is just the overture of 4-year tuition and fees still to come. So you're paying $60,000 and you have not yet paid your tuition fee. I mean, this is mind-boggling, right? And it's showing you, it's unmasking the level of corruption in academia, right? And by extension, in the United States. Tyrus is known as a feeder of elite school enrollees in China, given that every year very few mainland students matriculate at top private colleges like Harvard and Yale. In 2014, Paris was able to help 4 students to get into Harvard, 6 to Yale, 3 to Stanford, and 3 to MIT. In addition, many were accepted into increasingly foreign student-friendly public schools, including University of California schools and University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, which have witnessed a tenfold in growth in the number of Chinese students. In total, over 600 Tyrus students were accepted by the US top colleges in 2014. Impressive application results further stimulate price growth. Now, Tyrus service can cost up to $50,000. Requests to speak with Tyrus were turned down, right? So just to show you here, I will attach the articles that you can read further for your own knowledge, right? And for your own education, for your own information, because these things are happening daily. And we have got to pay attention to what is happening. So when we think about system that is meritocracy, that is based on meritocracy, I should say, it's not necessarily built on meritocracy as we are hearing in the media, because often the media do not tell us the full story. And that's why we have to inform ourselves. Now, this is coming from Reuters, right? And this article was written, let me see the date here, on May 25th, 2016, right? And I think I read an article that was from last year, and it's the same thing. Things have not changed, right? Because America is a capitalist society. It's a free market society. It believes in the free market ideology, and that free market ideology, education is also a part of that ideology, right? And healthcare, you outsource whatever you need to outsource, and whichever market is more profitable, that is the market that you will cling to, whether it's good for the institution or not, right? And that is what you have to understand. Profit is at the center of the decisions made even in academia, right? Now, how an industry helps Chinese students cheat their way into and through US colleges, right? And this is part 3, and you probably can go to the website on Reuters and read part 1 and part 2 for yourselves, right? So that you can see that the US education system, for the most part, is not built on meritocracy. I'm not here suggesting that there are not students who have gotten based on merit. I'm sure there are some, right? But for the most part, even for US citizens, right, it is not built on meritocracy, right? Very important. And that's what the Michael Sandel was saying, right? That's the top 1% who get into a lot of these Ivy League institutions, right? Not the people who are coming from the lower stratum of society. Now, the University of Iowa suspects at least 30 Chinese students of having used ringers to take their exams. So there also are allegations that there are persons who take exams on behalf of the students. The case offers a look inside a thriving underground economy of cheating services aimed at the hundreds of thousands of Chinese kids applying to and attending foreign colleges. Now, this is coming out of IO, right? The advertisements were tailored for Chinese college students far from home, struggling with the English language and an unfamiliar culture. Coaching services peppered the students with emails and chat messages in Chinese, offering to help foreign students at the US colleges do much of the work necessary for a university degree. The companies would author essays for clients, right? So they author their essays. They're not getting in based on meritocracy. Handle their homework, even take their exams, all for about $1,000 a course. Now, can you imagine if you have hundreds of thousands of Chinese students, right? The amount of money that these people make, right? And these things you would have thought were more common in third world countries, right? The United States likes to call itself a first world country, right? And other countries are banana republics, right? But this sounds like a banana republic in terms of what is happening here in the education system. For dozens of Chinese nationals at the University of Iowa, the offers proved irresistible, right? The love of money is the root of all evil. And these people who are taking part in this sort of string, in this sort of scam, right, definitely are lovers of money, which the Bible, right, clearly intimates. The love of it is the root of all evil. Test-taking services, paper writing, take online courses for you, says the social messaging profile of one Chinese coaching outfit used by Iowa students. Now, today, the University of Iowa, one of the largest state universities in the American Midwest, says it is investigating at least 30 students suspected of cheating. Three sources familiar with the inquiry say the number under investigation may be 2 or 3 times higher, right? And this is what we are seeing happening. The Iowa cheating rings are the latest evidence of how a vibrant East Asian industry is corrupting the US higher education system by gaming entrance exams, concocting college applications, and completing college coursework on behalf of students. These nimble operators not only help students cheat their way to universities, they also help them cheat their way through, right? So it doesn't leave them after they've been admitted into these universities, into these American universities. They help them through. Now, this is very interesting, right? Now, where are the intelligence agencies? Why are they not, being able to break up these sort of scamming activities? And, if it were done in Nigeria, or it was probably done in another country, you'd be hearing, and these countries are corrupt, right? And they practice things that are illegal, when these things are also common in America, right? Because America is a capitalist society. And remember now how it started and how it got a lot of its wealth through the enslavement, the bartering, the sale, the pillaging and the plundering of African nations and its people, or its peoples, right? We do forget that sometimes, right? And forget that even though, these are the descendants of the slave masters, but it is within their blood. It's there. And only God can take that sort of gene out, that desire to inflict harm on another person, right? We cannot forget that. And we're not blaming now and saying that all Europeans, Americans are the same, because that's not true, right? And I'm sure that lots of them are against this. And that is why the European Americans ought not to think that all African Americans are also, dull and they get their positions based on the DEI. based on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that they do not get it based on merit, right? You cannot begin to think like that, because if you argue like that, then we can also say that you didn't get yours by merit also, because you got yours through cheating. Because a lot of what is built in the American system, whether it be in the economic realm or in the educational realm, whatever realm, is done through cheating, right? And you just have to read the history. The history is very painful. And I'm not saying now that the history from 1860s and 19 whatever, right? I'm talking about recent history, right? The history is a painful one, right? A lot of our leaders are not leaders of moral integrity. And our system, as much as we don't like to hear it, is rigged. The companies are prospering by exploiting two intersecting interests: the growing demand by Chinese nationals to study overseas and the desire by US colleges to profit from foreign students willing to pay full tuition. It means, therefore, that there might be a US student, or maybe a student coming from another country, right, who has the capacity but doesn't have the money to pay. It means, therefore, that the US college will recruit agencies like these guys here, the Tyros and others among them, right, to recruit Chinese and other wealthy students who are able to pay. Not all Chinese students are able to pay, but the wealthy ones are able to pay, right, than to admit that qualified poor American who might find it very difficult to pay cash to get into college and might not be able to access scholarships and grants, right? Now, this is something that is amazing, and it's happening in the United States. And I remember in 2018, just before the pandemic, there were also a series of articles from these newspapers, including New York Times and the LA Times, about the Chinese, invasion. I'm using the words, my word, invasion of US colleges. And it was built on the fact that many of them cheated their ways into these elite institutions, like the Purdue's and the Harvards and stuff like that. And the Stanfords, right? Because they have the money. And sometimes they had limited English skills, right? Some of them barely able to understand what their professors were articulating in the classroom, right? Something that we need to pay attention. The newspapers like to present these stories, and afterwards things die down, and people just think that, oh, life goes on. And we don't care until it comes up again. And when it comes onto minorities, such as Black people, particularly Black people, right? American media like to use Black people as a face of people who are not smart, they're not bright enough, like their white counterparts, who've got their positions through meritocracy, when that, to a great degree, is also a lie, right? Because the American society has never been built on meritocracy, for the most part, right? It's the survival of the fittest. Now, I'm not suggesting that it might not give itself a little bit more, because it's a big country, right? So you have a little bit more, lots more opportunities than what you would expect in a third world country, or let us even say Britain, that was built on the class system, this monarchical system, right? The US was not built on the monarchical system, right? So they don't have a palatial culture of where there is a certain level of aristocracy, right? There are aristocrats there, but it doesn't have that same monarchical cultural underpinnings to it. As Reuters reported in March, some companies are leveraging weaknesses in the SAT standardized college entrance exam to help clients gain an unfair advantage on the test by feeding them questions in advance. So they're actually feeding these Chinese students questions in advance. And if they're doing these to the Chinese students, right? What are they doing to their white students, right? What are they doing to students who have, great connections in America, high connections, right? If you belong to a politician, or if you belong to, let us say you're the child of Bill Gates, or, whatever billionaire in America, don't you think you have friends in high places, right? And even if you are not able to, you don't have a friend who is making the exam, but you have a friend who has a friend, and they can connect you, right? With questions. So when you see these students going into Harvard and the Yales and the Princetons, a lot of these white American, they're not going there based on merit. A lot of them have access also to questions, right? And they're prompted before they go to these exams. And we don't know who is writing essays for them and all these things that they're doing for the Chinese. Because if they're doing these things for Chinese students, why don't you think that they'll be doing the same things for other students, including white American students, right? Who claim that they're at these colleges based on meritocracy and that they're smart. And if you go to Harvard, you're smart, right? Are you really? Are you really smart? Or is Harvard also a part of the grand business structure of the United States among other elite institutions? In addition, Reuters has identified companies in China that help students contrive their entire college application, embellishing or ghostwriting application essays, doctoring letters of recommendation from high school teachers, and even advising kids to obtain fake high school transcripts. Other providers continue to elicit assistance after admission, such as those that performed coursework for hire in Iowa City. This is an interesting situation, right? And we've got to take stock. We need to understand that this whole system of meritocracy that we say exists in the Western world is, for the most part, I'm not saying in all cases, but is largely a myth. It is a myth. It is a myth. And if you're a minority in the United States, and don't listen to the media and begin to process what they're saying, right? Because they're there to lie to you. And this whole concept that the left-wing people believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion is also delusional, because they don't believe in that, right? And there is a book here written by, let me stop sharing. I will share these articles with you in the description so you can read them for yourselves. You have to reach people. You have to read. Stop speaking to people who do not read. You have to speak with people who are informed, right? When you speak to people, a lot of times you find that people are going to people for their information. They believe everything they hear on the news, and that colors their understanding of the reality of the world in which they live. Now, this book, I'm not sure if you'll see it on my screen, but yeah, I'm not sure it's going to be, let me not, yeah, it's not going to be properly. So this is a book written by Edward Luce. He's the author of the book, and it's the Retreat of Western Liberalization, right? That's the title of the book, The Retreat of Western Liberalism, not liberalization, but liberalism. So let me repeat the name of the book. The author of the book is Edward Luce, and Luce is Luce. And the title of the book is The Retreat of Western Liberalism. Now, I read this book during the pandemic, and I thought it was a very easy read, a tour de force, an excellent, engaging book to understand some of the problems that we're facing in the Western world. But Edward Luce also dealt with the whole concept of equity and the whole system of meritocracy that we say that we have, which is not real, right? Even from this author's perspective. Now, Edward Luce is an Oxford graduate from the UK, right? And he got his degree in political science, history, and economics. So he's no lightweight, right? He's a thinker and someone who can expound on some of the problems that we are facing in our Western society. Now, here is the question he's posing here. What is, in a word, when it is packed with as much moral zeal as meritocracy? The answer is a great deal. Meritocrat owes his success to effort and talent. So that's the meaning, that is, that you owe your success to your talent and the effort that you put into the work that you did. Luck has nothing to do with it, or so he tells himself. Well, in the context of the Chinese, it's not necessarily luck, it's money also, which has something to do, bribery, right? Which, if that's what you want to call luck, right? I don't think I would call that luck. I think I would call that really bribery, right? Because you bribed your way into what you've achieved. Luck has nothing to do with it, or he or she tells himself. He says he tells himself, but say he or she tells him or herself. He or she, well, let me use he, since it's easier to use. And I'm just reading, I'm quoting from what he has in his book, right? He shares his view with everyone else, including those too slow or indolent to follow his example. Things only go wrong when the others dispute it. Now, magnify that to a nation of 324 million people. Now, the time when he wrote this book, it was around 2016, when Edward Luce wrote this book. So at the time, the US population was 324 million people. One that prides itself on being a land of opportunity. So he's referring here now to the United States. Imagine that between a half and 2/3 of its people, depending on how the question is framed, disagree. So you have a half, right, or 2/3 of Americans disagree that their system is built on meritocracy, right? So we're not saying you're Black people, we're talking about the US population in general, irrespective of the race that they are coming from. They believe the system's divisions are self-perpetuating. They used not to think that way. They used not to think that way, so they didn't think that way before. Imagine also that the meritocrats are too enamored of their just rewards to see it. Sooner or later, something will give. An exaggeration, about 1/3 of legacy applicants, right? Those whose parents attended or accepted into Harvard. Let me read that again. About 1/3 of legacy applicants, those whose parents attended or accepted into Harvard, right? That's a lot. So if your parents went to Harvard, 1/3 of you will be accepted there based on your parents attending that institution. Richard Reeves of Brookings Institution calls them dream borders. Judged by aptitude, almost half those in America's top 2/5 income bracket are there because of the luck of family background, right? So they're not there because they have the academic or scholastic aptitude. They're there because of family background. I want you to understand, because some of you are quite biased, right? That this book was not written. Edward Luce is not a Black person. He is not a minority. He's a British white person, right? And I'm just reading to you And this is taken from his book on page 44, right? From the book, The Retreat of Western Liberalism. And we shall look more at this book in another video. Think of the value of those unpaid internships and family connections. Think of what those tricky weekend tutors did for your prospects, right? A big share of those in the bottom fifth would be in the top if they had the same life chances. I'm going to read to you now before I end this video another important statistics that is cited by the same Edward Luce from the book Retreat of Western Liberalism. According to one Harvard study, so this study is coming from Harvard University. According to one Harvard study, more students attended America's elite universities from the top 1% of income backgrounds than from the bottom 60%. Let me read that again so that you can digest it. According to one Harvard study, more students attended America's elite universities from the top 1% of the income backgrounds than from the bottom 60%. About 1 in 4 of the richest Americans attended an elite university, compared with less than half of 1% of the bottom fifth. By far, this biggest determinant is the bed in which you were born. Why wouldn't the losers be angry? That's the question that Edward Luce is posing, right? So it means, therefore, this concept of getting into Harvard or Princeton or Yale, Oxford by extension in the UK, right? It's not built on meritocracy for the most part. It's built on the family from which you came, right? And a few, yes, they might take a few ones to suggest that, yes, SIM is built on meritocracy. Look at that person. Yeah, that person got in because it was built on meritocracy. I went on Harvard campus in 2007, right? I went to a conference, and you walk around the campus, as I did, and you just saw sprinkling of Black students on that campus, right? Not many Black students are there, right? So do you think that Harvard would be taking these few Black children, or Black students, I should say, into their college, into their university, and would have accepted the dullest mind among those Black people? You think that Claudine Gay represented that dull mind, and she was so dull that she had to plagiarize, and and only Black people plagiarize? Whites don't, Asians don't, right? And I'm not here defending Claudine Gay, right? I'm just trying to unmask the system to you, to suggest to you a lot of what I'm seeing on the internet, thinking that, Claudine Gay was just there because of the DEI, right? She had no scholastic aptitude, right? She didn't get her position based on merit, but whites do, right? Now, what world are you living in to think that? And then you have the talking points from the left, and you have the talking points from the right, and people think that those are the talking points, and that there's no gray areas, right? There are no shades of gray, right? The whole topic is not nuanced, right? And these are the facts that the media should have been giving us during all of this discourse and conflict surrounding Claudine Gay, right? And if Americans understand this and know that there are lots of foreign students, including Chinese students, who enter college not based on merit, but based on their pockets, right? And bribery, the system of bribery, not meritocracy, but the system of rivalry, right? In which the United States colleges and universities receives, receive, I should say, loads of money, right, to admit foreign students, right? It's time for us to get aware, become aware of these facts. Time for us to acquaint ourselves with these type of information so that we can become more informed and stop speaking ignorantly. I think that the whole debate surrounding Claudine Gay and other minorities is so built on politics, right? And the color that you attach yourself to, whether you are Democrat or Republican, or whatever country that you probably come from, whatever colors that might be attached to your political parties, right? But it's time for us to color our minds with facts and with truth and not with political partisan politics. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you have learned something and please like, share, and comment. And hopefully we can have another much more illuminating discussion in our next chat. Thank you so much. Bye.